Hello, welcome back to Press Review for Tuesday, the 10th of December. Today we will look at the ongoing Syrian crisis and the Saudi relations with its neighboring Gulf states, as a union of Gulf states is suggested. But as usual, let's start with the papers here in the UK. Starting with The Guardian, which leads its front page reporting that more than 500 of the world's leading authors, including 5 Nobel Peace Prize winners, have condemned the scale of state surveillance revealed by Edward Snowden and warned that spy agencies are undermining democracy. It also reports on Nelson Mandela's funeral, saying that the memorial will force all foes together. The Independent leads its front page reporting that the Save the Children charity has been accused by a whistleblower of self-censoring criticism of Big Six energy suppliers for fear of upsetting existing or potential corporate donors. It also features a picture of boat race protester Trenton Oldfield, who has won his case against deportation. And the Daily Telegraph leads its front page reporting on industry watchdog Financial Services Consumer Panel, saying that a generation of pensioners is being let down by regulators failing to stop Britain's insurers and brokers from burgling OAPs through charges and fees on retirement plans. It also reports on MPs saying that the NHS must end the postcode lottery of cancer care, which makes patients in some areas wait more than 2 weeks to see a specialist. And now let's take a look at the top stories from the Middle East. As the Geneva peace talks loom, the United States is faced with reaching out to Syrian rebels who espouse an Islamist agenda and draw support from American allies in the region. Let's take a look at what analysts are saying. Lebanese newspaper Daily Al-Akhbar leads its English front page with an article headlined "Road to Geneva II will divide the Syrian opposition attend." Writer Suhaib Anjarini claims that the United States and Russia have reached a deal to allow the Syrian National Coalition to form the opposition's delegation to Geneva. Then leading Syrian opposition figures are likely to boycott the meeting. According to Anjarini, Syrian opposition sources have told Al-Akhbar that members of the diplomatic team of US Ambassador Robert Ford confirmed there was an American-Russian understanding to let the National Coalition of Syria Revolution and Opposition Forces, the SNC, form the opposition's delegation to the Geneva II conference. Other sources linked this development to Saudi intelligence chief Bandar bin Sultan's visit to Moscow. Anjarini refers to an independent Syrian figure who said that an agreement was reached during Bandar's visit to Moscow, but we don't have any clear details. If true, this will be a consolation prize offered to Saudi Arabia in order to hold the conference, and the Saudis in return will have to consent to Iranian participation. Anjarini also refers to SNC member Khalid Nasser, who said, "For the SNC to be in charge of forming the delegation is a principal condition for going to Geneva, albeit not the only condition. The most important prerequisite is obtaining guarantees to form a transitional authority with full powers, including supervision of the army and security." Anjarini points out that Nasser's remarks were echoed by the position declared by the Syrian Muslim Brotherhood, who recently called for compelling the regime to go to Geneva under an agreement governed by Chapter 7, specifying the details of a transitional authority with full powers, which has no role. Anjarini quotes Haytham Manna of the Opposition National Coordination Committee for Democratic Change, the NCC, who said for Geneva II to succeed, a number of conditions must be satisfied, both subjective and objective. The most important subjective factor is that the opposition should form a convincing and competent delegation, and the most important objective factor is that obstacles to putting together a delegation that has the legitimacy of representing the largest possible segment of the Syrian people should be removed. Manna denied knowing anything about a new American-Russian accord over this issue and added, "If an agreement of this kind were indeed to be reached, then we will not go to a conference that is being thwarted in advance." Anjarini claims that the list of invited countries is almost complete, and the only thing is now lacks is an accord over the participation of Iran and Saudi Arabia. Anjarini cites Luay Hussein, head of the Building the Syrian State movement, who declared a stance similar to the NCC's. He told Al-Akhbar newspaper the Americans and their allies are endeavoring to have the delegation headed by the SNC. Geneva will not be a Syrian conference with international sponsorship, but an American-Russian conference attended by Syrians. And to conclude, Angerini states that the list of invited countries is almost complete, and the only thing that now lacks is an accord over the participation of Iran and Saudi Arabia. It is likely that the two countries will receive an invitation to attend the peace conference after a December 20 preparatory meeting in Geneva in their capacity as members of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Marlene Khalifi writes an article for As-Safir Lebanese newspaper. The article is headlined, Russian envoy to Beirut calls on Iran to join Geneva II, featuring Russian ambassador to Beirut Alexander Zaspikin, who has refused to ask Hezbollah to get out of Syria and supports Lebanon's stability. According to Khalifi, Russia under President Vladimir Putin is determining the Middle East's future in partnership and solidarity with the United States, which cannot be the sole player in its vital part of the world. This was irrefutably proven in Syria, especially after Russia imposed a settlement agreement to prevent US airstrikes against President Bashar al-Assad, thus saving Washington from its own trap. Commenting on the visit to Moscow by the head of Saudi intelligence, Prince Bandar bin Sultan, and his meeting with Putin, Zaspikin said that President Putin contacted several heads of state as a prelude to overcoming the obstacles facing the Geneva II conference. This work is continuous, and the Saudi role is very important, so we wanted to talk with the Saudis on this subject, at least so that the Saudi Arabia doesn't take a negative stance toward the conference, but to be supportive. Zaspkin added there is a lot in common with Saudi Arabia, as well as some differences which may exist with the Western parties too. Russia wants a political settlement in Syria. The Saudis say that too. The majority of the parties want it except for Al-Qaeda and some terrorist gangs. The rest of the parties also want a political settlement, but depending on its objectives. And in response to questions by As-Safir, Zaspikin explained the military relationship with Saudi Arabia. He said military cooperation has been under consideration for a long time, but progress has been very slow. With regards to Russia, the political decision for collaboration was there. The question for the future is whether cooperation will develop into tangible contracts, or will it remain within the framework of agreements on principle? In any case, this is not related to the Syrian conflict. Zaspkin refuses to go into the details about Syria's future or to give specific details about the nature of the next regime and the transitional phase. He said Russia envisions a mixed solution that combines the current regime and the opposition, but the handover of power from the regime to the opposition is absolutely out of question. At the same time, the regime cannot remain as is. As to how the agreement will happen, that's up to the Geneva conference, which will discuss the details and cannot be determined now. And regarding Iran, Zaspikin described Russian-Iranian relations as strong and not subject to any shocks or bargains. He said that Moscow calls for Iran's participation in Geneva II because its participation is very useful, given that it's influential on the situation in Syria. Finally, regarding Lebanon's dissociation policy, the Russian ambassador said, in the current circumstances, when it's difficult to isolate Lebanon from what is happening in Syria, why should we ask Hezbollah to get out of Syria while we have been demanding for 2 years that other armed groups in northern Lebanon not to interfere in the ongoing war in Syria, and no one responds to us? The Daily Beast features an article written by Josh Rogin, headlined with How the USA Lost Its Syrian Allies. Rogin argues that as the United States moves forward with the summit it hopes will end the civil war in Syria, the Obama administration finds itself alienated from the opposition forces it tried and failed to cultivate for the last 2 years. In turn, Rogin believes that the Obama administration has begun reaching out to Syrian rebels who espouse an Islamist agenda and draw support from American allies in the region like Saudi Arabia, as opposed to the United States directly. Rogin insists that to succeed, the peace talks involving the US, Russia, the United Nations, the regime of President Bashar al-Assad, various parts of the fractured Syrian opposition, and perhaps even Iran, all sides will have to agree to a ceasefire. Rogin states that since the first Geneva conference, the relationship between the Obama administration and key centrist opposition groups, including the Syrian Opposition Coalition, the Free Syrian Army, and the Supreme Military Command, run by General Salim Idris, has deteriorated, along with the influence and power of these US-allied militias inside Syria. Rogin quotes Muaz Mustafa, executive director of the Syrian Emergency Task Force, an American organization that works closely with various Syrian opposition groups, who said, "We are forced to engage with Islamists at this point because we have not properly supported more democratic-leaning SMC and the FSA. There is limited engagement with the Islamist groups in order to bring them on board with Geneva II, although they had made clear in the past that they don't recognize the Geneva process." Rogin sees that the moderate opposition has been so marginalized, in part due to a string of broken promises by the Obama administration, that US government officials are now petitioning members of some armed Islamic groups to attend the Geneva conference, according to several sources close to the discussions. Rogin points out that the Obama administration promised to increase military support to the Free Syrian Army following Assad's mass use of chemical weapons in August, but little actual military support ever materialized. Rogin argues that the latest blow to the opposition delivered by Washington was the P5+1 deal with Iran over that country's nuclear weapons program. Rogin notes that for many experts, the Obama administration's stance is increasingly more aligned with the Assad regime and its allies than with the opposition. Rogin quotes Jim Hooper, a former US diplomat in Damascus, as saying, rightly or wrongly, the administration view the jihadist opposition as the real enemy. What they would like is for the US-backed centrists and moderates to work with the regime against the real extremists. The Iranians would like to see that as well. To conclude, Rogin points out that the Obama administration's push for a diplomatic agreement now, at the moment of the opposition's greatest weakness, was not necessarily in the opposition's best interest, and they know it. For the opposition, it's a trap. They cannot win. He said, "You cannot recover at the negotiating table what you've lost at the battlefield." As the GCC's annual summit takes place in Kuwait today, let's take a look at what analysts are saying about Saudi and its position with other GCC members and the US. Writing for the Journal of Turkish Weekly, Ali Hussein Bakir takes a look at Saudi-US relations, asking, how far can the kingdom go? Bakir says, over the last decade, Saudi Arabia has faced many difficult challenges, both internally and externally. These challenges have grown since the Iranian Revolution in 1979, with the Iraq-Iran War and the Second Gulf War and its implications during the 1990s, the US invasions of Iraq in 2003, and its geopolitical consequences, and last but not least, the outbreak of the Arab uprisings at the end of 2010. Bakir adds that Saudi Arabia had managed to use other players on the geopolitical chessboard effectively, Iraq at one stage, Egypt and Syria at another, and of course the US, its major ally during all those times, was always a part of the equation. However, with the outbreak of the Arab uprisings, Saudi Arabia seemed to face its biggest challenge to date, especially with the breakup of the regional balances and the US decline in the Middle East. Bakir notes, during all these stages, Saudi Arabia, a country known to prefer silent diplomacy, has shown an unusual and uncustomary boldness in its foreign policy. Saudi Arabia has presented several rare challenges to the American line. United States allies expected at least the same level of support and commitment from Washington that President Assad is getting from Moscow and Tehran, something which hasn't happened. Bakir notes that the kingdom has expressed its dissatisfaction and frustration with the United States policy in many ways, including the Saudi foreign minister walking out of a Friends of Syria meeting and declining a UN non-permanent Security Council seat. He says there is no doubt that these actions are very important messages to express the kingdom's anger and deep frustration at what is going on regionally and towards the US disregard for the interests and concerns of its allies. But how far can Saudi Arabia take this, and to what extent such steps can move important pieces on the chessboard? Bakir believes that Saudi Arabia can respond by ignoring US regional concerns and interests on certain issues. In that sense, the kingdom has the ability to be a disruptive player, creating problems for US in the region. The kingdom cannot persist, however, in this behavior unless it is willing to turn onto another Iran. And he concludes that there is a lesson to be learned for regional allies here, that if they wait for the United States to take actions or decisions to secure their own interests rather than securing them by themselves, they will end up waiting for a long time. Writing for Al-Monitor, Madawi Rashid believes the Omani rejection of GCC union adds insult to injury for Saudi Arabia, saying that the Omani stance may force the kingdom to pause in its regional policies. Taking a look at Saudi Arabia's proposal to move the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, toward unity, receiving a blow, Al-Rashid says Omani Foreign Minister Yusuf bin Alawi surprised the audience when he bluntly declared that his country is against the union and will withdraw from the new body unless it sees the light. She adds that though Oman had previously expressed its rejection of the Saudi proposal in 2011, the minister's recent statement came at Saudi Arabia's worst moments when both international and regional power shifts are increasingly eroding the Saudi position. Alawi's statement shattered the illusion of cooperation and the chances of Gulf unity at a time when Saudi Arabia is desperate to regain its stature, at least among its Gulf neighbors. Al-Rashid notes that the direct language of the Omani minister is not something that Saudi Arabia is used to, especially coming from its close partners in the GCC, adding that for a long time Oman resisted following the confrontational Saudi position with Iran or other Arab countries that Saudi Arabia deemed threatening, such as Syria. Al-Rashid points out that Oman may not be as desperate as other Arab recipients of Gulf aid. It can afford to maintain its neutrality and even openly reject the unity project under the auspices of Saudi Arabia. The much-desired Gulf economic integration cannot come with greater political unity, as the latter may undermine Oman's ability to remain neutral in any future regional conflict with Iran. Another key point she highlights is that Oman must have felt secure enough to facilitate a secret dialogue with Iran, Saudi Arabia's archenemy. Analysis outcomes of the GCC summit, Al-Rashid believes Saudi Arabia may find itself increasingly sidelined, with other GCC countries pursuing their own projects of living peacefully with their Iranian neighbor and reaping the benefits of greater economic and financial cooperation. And she concludes that it is the time for Saudi Arabia to listen to its neighbors and even abandon grandiose projects and expansionist agendas. It must also realize that economic competition and political rivalries can be managed, but religious wars are often long and exhausting for a simple reason: the sacred cannot be easily divided. The Gulf News takes a look at the problems regarding the GCC summit in its article titled "Saudi Call for Gulf Union Faces Hurdles at GCC Summit." The paper says that Saudi Arabia's dream of binding the Gulf states into a union will get a skeptical hearing as a summit today, with differences over Iran, Egypt and Syria demonstrating that the Gulf's governments do not all speak with one voice. It adds that diplomats in the region say that Omanis are not the only skeptics. The UAE and Kuwait also expressed reservations at last year's summit behind closed doors. They say despite the similarities of the 6 Gulf monarchies, they have diverging regional outlooks, economies and political systems. It states that the others are increasingly gaining the confidence to veer off a script written by Saudi Arabia, which has by far the biggest economy and more citizens than the other 5 combined. It quotes Robert Jordan, US ambassador to Riyadh from 2001 to 2003, who says, "A number of Gulf states view Saudi Arabia as the gorilla in the room. Much as they have a lot in common with them, they don't want to be dominated by Saudis," adding that given the somewhat divergent attitudes on Iran and to a lesser extent Syria, it may be harder to get a common ground in a shared foreign policy. It also quotes Shadi Hamid of the Brookings Institute in Doha, who says, "I think there is going to be more tension within the GCC because the prospect of Iran's rehabilitation into the region does introduce a new set of tensions because the Gulf countries don't have the same policies towards Iran." And joining us today on the show is political analyst Nidal Naisseh. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Naisseh. Can you hear me?
Thank you, Mr. Kar. Yeah, I can hear you.
Mr. Naisseh, as you know, the GCC summit is taking place today, and Oman has firmly said to Saudi Arabia that if the union goes ahead, it would review its membership of the GCC. Why do you think Oman and GCC countries are not in favor?
Well, in fact, good afternoon to you all. First of all, I think that Oman, first of all, we have to look for the function of Oman in this council. It has been shown that it is a kind of a back channel of the United States. You know, I think that Oman is speaking on behalf of the United States, and it's telling the other countries what is the roof of this council and what is the American view of this council. I don't think that the United States will allow any kind of union of this countries, and the United States is sending messages, excuse me, through Oman to these states. You know, Oman, in Oman, the talks about the nuclear Iranian nuclear file were taking place for a long time before they have been disclosed. Oman is, I think, is sending the United States messages to this council.
And another question, Mr. Naisseh, why do you think Saudi Arabia is really keen on such a union?
Excuse me?
Why, in your opinion, do you think Saudi Arabia is desperate for such a union amongst the Gulf states?
Well, Saudi Arabia now I think that this council after the so-called Arab Spring has burned all its cards. I don't think that they can play any future political role in the region after the so-called Arab Spring, and after the American-Iranian agreement about the Iranian nuclear program. I think that there will be no need for this council at all.
So you think
the function of this council was only to make such a balance, a kind of balance with the with the Iranian. So I think that Saudi Arabia knows this fact very well. They know that after the American-Iranian agreement, they lost any future role in the whole region, not only in the Gulf region.
So you believe, Mr. Naisseh, that the agreement will not happen? The union will not happen?
I don't think that it will happen at all in the future.
And in the light of the Omani stance towards such a union, do you believe this will affect severely the relationships between Oman and Saudi Arabia?
I think that there are historical, hostilities between all countries, not only between Oman and Saudi Arabia. There have been wars, in fact, among these countries, between Saudi Arabia and Emirates, between Qatar and Bahrain, about the so-called Fished Devil Islands. There had also been, conflict between Iraq and Kuwait.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Naisseh, political analyst based in Damascus. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
And back to our news for today. Let's take a look at the top headlines from international papers. The Moscow Times leads its front page with the headline, Putin shuts RIA Novosti news agency. And the International New York Times leads its front page with the headline, ANC in turmoil loses a potent symbol. China's Global Times leads with the headline, North Korea purge first of series as Kim Jong-un's uncle is pictured being dragged away by North Korean guards during a meeting in Pyongyang. And finally, the UAE's Gulf News leads its front page with the headline, comprehensive health screening for Emiratis. For more updates, please visit us at levant.tv. That was it for today. I'll see you on Thursday with another press review.